This is HOA Clapback. I did not raise my voice. I raised my evidence packet. I am standing in my driveway in Erie, Pennsylvania, holding a small cardboard box that contains gate hardware, latches, hinges, nothing unusual, and Teresa Gray is taking photographs of it like I am running a chop shop. She is the records custodian for the Fairview Estates Association. Middle-aged, tight gray curls, pink sun hat, red light jacket, and she has her phone aimed at my porch with the kind of focus you would use to document a crime scene. I moved here 6 months ago using my GI Bill to cover night classes at the community college while I worked days as a freight coordinator. The neighborhood looked quiet when I signed the papers. That was before I learned that the Fairview Estates Association treats fence styles like fine art, and Teresa Gray treats homeowners like suspects. She lowers her phone and looks at me with the expression of someone who just caught me red-handed. That box has been sitting outside for 2 hours, she says. Visible clutter. You are in violation of Section 4.7. I have read Section 4.7. It is about abandoned vehicles and bulk trash. This is a box of gate hardware. I ordered it yesterday. She shakes her head slowly, like I am a child who refuses to learn. I do not negotiate with violations. You will receive a notice by tomorrow, and the fine starts at $100. I set the box down inside my garage and close the door. She is still standing there, tapping notes into her phone. I walk back out and ask her if there is anything else she needs to document. She looks up and smiles, the kind of smile that does not reach anywhere near her eyes. You should know that any fence project requires pre-approval, a surveyed property line, and compliance with the setback standards. I assume you have started that process. I have not started anything yet. I only bought the hardware because it was on sale. I am planning to put up a 4-foot privacy fence along the back property line in a few weeks. Nothing wild. Just enough to give my dog some space and keep the sightline clean for the family barbecue I am hosting next month. My sister is flying in with her kids, my mom is driving up from Pittsburgh, and I want the yard to look finished. That is the stakes here. A simple fence, a family event, and a records custodian who apparently thinks she is running a military tribunal. She tilts her head. You will need to submit an application, pay the review fee, provide a full survey, and wait for board approval. That process takes 4 to 6 weeks. Any work done without approval will result in an immediate stop work order and escalating fines. I thank her for the information and go inside. I call my buddy Marcus, a local paralegal who helped me close on the house. He listens to the whole story and then laughs, not in a mean way, but in the way you laugh when someone tells you they just got pulled over for going 26 in a 25. He says Teresa is known in Erie for this exact behavior. She stalls document requests, invents fees that are not in the covenants, and she has a habit of overcharging for copies of meeting minutes. He tells me to get everything in writing and to keep a camera rolling whenever she shows up. He also tells me that the Fairview Estates Association has a reputation for micromanaging fence projects, and that I should expect resistance even if I follow every rule to the letter. I spend the next 2 days reading the covenants cover to cover. The fence rules are vague. Maximum height is 4 feet for front and side yards, 6 feet for rear yards, and all fences must be of a design and material consistent with the community aesthetic. There is no definition of what that aesthetic is. There is a review fee of $75 and a requirement for a survey, but nothing about a 4 to 6 week wait. I call the management company and ask for a timeline. The woman on the phone says applications are usually processed within 2 weeks, sometimes faster if the board is not busy. I ask her to email me that confirmation. She says she will. 2 days later, I call back because I never received the email. A different person answers and tells me they have no record of my call. I ask again. She says she will look into it and get back to me. Another 2 days pass. Nothing. This is the side complication that makes everything harder. The management company loses my dispute packet twice and acts like it is my fault. Every time I try to get clarification, I get a new person on the phone, and every new person tells me something slightly different. Meanwhile, Teresa sends me a formal notice about the visible clutter violation, printed on Fairview Estates Association letterhead, and the fine is $100, due within 10 days. I take a photo of the notice and text it to Marcus. He replies within 5 minutes. Pay it under protest and document everything. You are building a paper trail. I pay the fine online and include a note in the payment portal that I dispute the interpretation of Section 4.7. I also submit my fence application, attach a survey I had done when I bought the house, include photos of similar fences in the neighborhood, and pay the $75 review fee. I get an auto-reply email saying my application has been received and will be reviewed within 14 business days. I screenshot everything. 3 days later, Teresa shows up again while I am unloading groceries. She is holding a bundle of zip ties, the heavy-duty kind you use for attaching signs to posts, and she has a clipboard tucked under her arm. She walks up to my driveway and tells me that my fence application is incomplete. I ask her what is missing. She says I need to provide proof of contractor insurance, a detailed materials list, and a notarized acknowledgement that I will restore any damaged landscaping. None of that is mentioned in the covenants. I pull out my phone and open the covenant PDF. I scroll to the fence section and show her the requirements. She glances at the screen and waves her hand. Those are the old rules. The board updated them last quarter. I ask her to send me the updated rules. She says I need to request them in writing and pay a document retrieval fee of $30. I tell her I already paid $75 for the application review, and that should include access to the current rules. She smiles again, that same cold smile. I do not negotiate with violations. If you want the updated rules, you submit a written request, and you pay the fee. Otherwise, your application will be denied as incomplete. I go inside and email the management company. I explain the situation and ask them to send me the updated fence rules. I copy Marcus on the email. The management company replies 2 days later and says they are not aware of any updated fence rules and that the covenants I have are current as of the last annual meeting. I forward that email to Teresa. She does not reply. Instead, she sends me a new notice the next day. It is titled Compliance Escalation, and it informs me that due to my failure to complete the application process, I am now subject to an amenities lockout. I will lose access to the community pool, the clubhouse, and the walking trails until my application is approved and all outstanding fines are paid. The notice also says that any work started without approval will result in an immediate stop work order and a fine of $500, with an additional $250 per day until the work is halted. I read the notice 3 times. It is signed by Teresa Gray, records custodian, and countersigned by 2 board members I have never met. Marcus reads the notice and tells me it is harassment, plain and simple. He says the amenities lockout is not supported by the covenants unless I am delinquent on dues, which I am not. He also tells me that the escalating fines are punitive and that I should document every interaction. He offers to help me organize an evidence packet. I take him up on it. I also call the contractor I hired to do the fence work, a guy named Ray who has been doing residential fencing in Erie for 15 years. I tell him what is happening and ask him if he has dealt with Fairview Estates before. He groans. Oh yeah, that is Teresa territory. She tried to shut down a deck project I did 2 years ago. Claimed the railing height was off by half an inch. I had the building inspector come out and confirm it was code compliant, and she still filed a complaint with the city. Cost my client an extra 2 weeks and a bunch of legal fees. Good luck, man. I ask Ray if he is still willing to do the work. He says yes, but only if I get written approval from the HOA first. He does not want to start the job and then get hit with a stop work order. I tell him I understand. I also ask him if he has ever had a situation where a homeowner started work and the HOA towed equipment or threatened contractors. He says yes, absolutely. Teresa has called the police on contractors before, claimed they were trespassing or operating without permits. It is her favorite move. She waits until the crew is halfway through the job, then she shows up with a camera and a cop, and suddenly everything stops. Ray tells me to get everything in writing, keep my permits visible, and have my phone ready to record. I spend the next week gathering evidence. I pull the invoice trail for the fence application, the payment receipts, the emails with the management company, the notices from Teresa, and the covenant documents. Marcus helps me organize everything into a binder with tabs and a timeline. He also drafts a demand letter to the board, requesting a hearing and a written response to the amenities lockout. We send the letter via certified mail and email. The board does not reply for 10 days. When they finally do, the response is one sentence. Your application is under review. No timeline, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the lockout issue. Meanwhile, I get a call from Ray. He says he is ready to start work as soon as I have approval. I tell him I am still waiting. He says he has a small window in his schedule, and if I do not lock it in soon, he will have to move on to the next job. I call the management company again and ask for a status update. The woman on the phone says the board meets once a month, and my application will be discussed at the next meeting, which is 3 weeks away. I tell her that is unacceptable and that I need a decision sooner because I have a family event coming up and a contractor who is about to bail. She says there is nothing she can do. I ask to speak to a supervisor. She puts me on hold for 10 minutes, then comes back and says the supervisor is not available. I hang up and call Marcus. He tells me to keep pushing and to show up at the next board meeting in person. 2 days later, I am in my backyard measuring the fence line with a tape measure when Teresa appears at the property line. She is holding her phone again, recording. I stop what I am doing and turn to face her. She says, "You are in violation of the stop work order." I point out that I have not started any work. I am measuring. She says measuring is preparation, and preparation without approval is a violation. I do not negotiate with violations. I fold up the tape measure and walk inside. I am done playing nice. I call Marcus and tell him I want to escalate. He says the next step is to file a formal complaint with the management company and request an emergency hearing. He also suggests I start building a case around vendor favoritism, because Teresa has a pattern of steering homeowners towards specific contractors who give the HOA kickbacks. I ask him how he knows that. He says he has seen it before, and if I dig into the HOA financials, I will probably find invoice trails that do not add up. I ask him how I get access to the financials. He says I submit a written request under Pennsylvania law, and the HOA has to provide them within 5 business days. If they refuse, I can file a complaint with the state. I submit the request the next day. I ask for 3 years of financial records, including vendor invoices, contractor payments, and board meeting minutes. Teresa replies within 2 hours. She says the request will cost $450 in document retrieval fees, and that I need to submit payment before she will process it. I forward her email to Marcus. He laughs and says she just handed us ammunition. Pennsylvania law caps document fees at actual copying costs, which for digital records is basically nothing. He drafts a response citing the statute and demanding compliance within 5 business days. We send it certified mail. Teresa does not reply. Instead, I get a new notice 3 days later. It is a towing authorization. The notice says that any vehicles or equipment parked in association common areas or used for unapproved construction will be towed at the owner's expense. The notice is signed by Teresa and includes a magnetic placard number that she says will be provided to the tow company. I read the notice and realized this is her next move. She is setting up a tow trap. If Ray shows up with his truck and equipment, she is going to claim it is parked illegally and have it towed. I call Ray and warn him. He says he has seen this before, and he will make sure to park only on my property, not on the street or the easement. I thank him and tell him I will let him know when I have approval. The next day, I get a text from my neighbor 2 doors down, a quiet guy named Phil who mostly keeps to himself. He says, "Hey, I saw Teresa messing with something in your yard earlier. Thought you should know." I call him and ask what he saw. He says he was walking his dog around noon, and he noticed Teresa crouched down near my back property line, pulling at something in the ground. He did not get close enough to see what it was, but it looked like she was tugging on a stake or a marker. I thank him and go outside to check. Sure enough, one of the survey stakes that marks my rear property line has been pulled halfway out of the ground. The orange tape is still attached, but the stake is loose and leaning. I take photos from multiple angles, including close-ups that show dirt disturbed around the base. I also take a video walking the entire property line, showing all the other stakes in place and undisturbed. I send the photos to Marcus. He tells me to file a police report. I call the Erie Police non-emergency line and explain that someone tampered with my property markers. The officer who takes the report asks if I know who did it. I tell him I have a witness who saw Teresa Gray near the markers around the time it happened. He says he will send an officer out to take a statement. 2 hours later, a patrol car pulls up and a young officer takes my statement, looks at the photos and writes everything down. He also walks the property line and confirms that the other stakes are intact. He says tampering with survey markers can be a criminal offense, and that I should keep the photos and consider installing a camera. I thank him and tell him I already have a doorbell camera that covers the front, and I am planning to add one in the back. That night, I install a battery-powered trail camera on a tree near the back fence line. It is motion-activated and records in 1080p. I angle it to cover the survey stakes and the area where Teresa was seen. The next morning, I check the footage. Nothing overnight. But at 10:30 a.m., Teresa appears on camera. She walks along the property line, stops at the same stake Phil saw her near, and crouches down. She tugs on the stake again, harder this time, and pulls it completely out of the ground. She looks around, then drops the stake in the grass and walks away. The whole thing is on video. I download the file, make 3 backup copies, and send one to Marcus. He replies immediately. That is evidence of vandalism and possibly obstruction. File another police report and attach the video. I file the second report online and attach the video file. The same officer calls me back an hour later and says he watched the video. He says he will forward it to a detective and that I should expect a follow-up within a few days. He also tells me to document any further contact with Teresa and to avoid confronting her directly. I agree. The next day, Ray calls and says he has a 3-day window starting tomorrow. He can do the fence if I give him the green light. I tell him I still do not have formal approval, but I am prepared to move forward anyway because I have documented everything and I am confident the HOA is acting in bad faith. Ray hesitates. He says he does not want to get dragged into a legal fight. I tell him I will indemnify him and that I have a paralegal helping me. He finally agrees, but he says if Teresa shows up and causes a scene, he is packing up and leaving. I tell him that is fair. The next morning, Ray and his crew arrive at 7 a.m. They unload posts, panels, concrete mix, and tools. Ray walks the property line with me and confirms the measurements. He sets up a string line between the survey stakes to mark the fence path. Everything is going smoothly. By 9 a.m., they have dug the first 6 post holes and are mixing concrete. That is when Teresa appears. She is carrying her clipboard and her bundle of zip ties, and she has her phone out recording. She walks straight up to Ray and says, "Stop. You are in violation of HOA covenants. This work is not approved." Ray looks at me. I step forward and say, "I have submitted my application, paid the fees, and followed every requirement in the covenants. The board has failed to respond within a reasonable time, and I am proceeding with the work." Teresa shakes her head. "I do not negotiate with violations. You will stop now, or I will call the police and have this site shut down." Ray puts his shovel down and starts to walk toward his truck. I hold up my hand. Wait. I pull out my phone and call the police non-emergency line. I explain the situation and request an officer to come out and mediate. The dispatcher says someone will be there within 20 minutes. I tell Ray to hold off until the cop arrives. He agrees, but he is clearly frustrated. Teresa does not leave. She stands at the edge of my property, recording everything. Ray and his crew sit on the tailgate of the truck, waiting. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulls up. It is the same officer who took my previous reports. He gets out, walks over, and asks what is going on. I explain that I have an ongoing dispute with the HOA, that I have submitted my application and been stonewalled, and that Teresa is trying to stop the work without legal authority. Teresa interrupts and says I am in violation of the covenants, and that the HOA has the authority to issue stop work orders. The officer looks at both of us and says, "This is a civil matter. I cannot enforce HOA rules. If you have a dispute, you need to resolve it through the HOA process or take it to court." He turns to Teresa and says, "If you are on his property without permission, you are trespassing." She says she is standing on the easement. The officer shrugs. "Unless you have a legal right to be here, I suggest you leave." Teresa glares at me, then walks away. The officer tells Ray he is free to continue working as long as he is not violating any city codes. Ray thanks him and gets back to work. By noon, the crew has set all 12 posts in concrete and strung the string line for the panels. The concrete is still wet. That is when Teresa comes back. She walks up to the nearest post, points at it, and says, "These posts are 2 inches inside the setback. You are in violation. You need to pull them out and reset them." Ray looks at her, then looks at me. I pull out the survey and show her the property line. The posts are exactly where they are supposed to be, 6 inches inside my property line. Teresa says the setback is measured from the easement, not the property line. I show her the covenant language. It says setback is measured from the property line. She says the board interprets it as the easement. I tell her the board does not have the authority to reinterpret written covenants. She pulls out her phone and makes a call. A few minutes later, a tow truck pulls up to the curb. The driver gets out and Teresa walks over to him. They talk for a minute, then the driver walks onto my property and looks at Ray's truck. He pulls a magnetic placard out of his pocket and holds it up. Teresa points at the truck and says something I cannot hear. The driver nods and walks back to his tow truck. I walk over and ask the driver what he is doing. He says he has been authorized by the HOA to tow any vehicles involved in unapproved construction. I tell him the truck is parked on my private property and that the HOA has no authority to tow it. He shrugs and says he is just following orders. I pull out my phone and take a photo of his placard and his truck license plate. I also call the police again. The dispatcher says an officer will be there soon. Ray walks over and says he is done. He says this is too much drama and he is not risking his truck. I beg him to wait until the cop arrives. He hesitates, then agrees to wait 5 more minutes. The cop arrives in 4. It is a different officer this time, an older guy with a tired expression. He listens to both sides, looks at the truck, and tells the tow driver that he cannot tow a vehicle from private property without the owner's consent or a court order. The driver argues that he has HOA authorization. The officer says that is not enough. The driver gets back in his tow truck and leaves. Teresa stands there, fuming. Ray and his crew finish setting the posts and leave. The concrete is curing. That night, I review everything with Marcus. I show him the video of Teresa pulling the survey stake, the photos of the towing attempt, and the police reports. He says I have enough to file a harassment complaint and possibly pursue a restraining order. He also says I should push for the financial records and look for vendor favoritism. I ask him how that connects. He says if Teresa is steering people towards certain contractors and taking kickbacks, that is fraud, and it strengthens my case that her actions are motivated by personal gain, not rule enforcement. I ask him how I prove that. He says the invoice trail is the key. If the HOA has been paying the same contractor over and over for inflated amounts, that is the evidence. I send another demand for the financial records, this time with a copy to the management company and the board president. I also include a summary of the harassment incidents and request an emergency hearing. The board does not reply, but the management company does. They say my hearing is scheduled for the next board meeting, which is 2 weeks away. I tell Marcus that is too late. My family event is in 3 weeks, and I need the fence done now. He says to proceed with the work and prepare for the hearing. He also says to bring the video, the police reports, and the invoice trail if I can get it. The next morning I check the trail camera. Teresa has not come back. The posts are curing nicely. Ray calls and says he can come back in 2 days to install the panels, but only if I can guarantee Teresa will not show up. I tell him I will have someone there to witness and record. He agrees. I call Phil and ask if he can come over and be a witness during the panel installation. He says yes, and he also tells me something important. He says Teresa did the same thing to him 2 years ago when he tried to replace his deck railing. She claimed the railing was too high, filed a complaint with the city, and dragged out the process for months. Phil eventually gave up and hired the contractor Teresa recommended, and the whole thing cost him twice as much. He says he regrets not fighting back, and he is happy to help me. I thank him and tell him to bring a camera. 2 days later, Ray and his crew come back. Phil is there with his phone. Teresa does not show up during the install, but she sends someone else, a guy in his 50s, who introduces himself as Brad, the board president. He watches from the sidewalk and takes notes. He does not interfere. Ray installs all the panels in 4 hours. The fence looks perfect. Brad walks over as the crew is packing up and hands me a letter. It is a notice of hearing, dated for next week. The letter says I am being fined $500 for starting work without approval, and an additional $250 per day until the fence is removed or approved. I take the letter and tell Brad I will see him at the hearing. That night, Marcus and I go through the hearing prep. He says I need to present the timeline, the evidence of harassment, the police reports, and the video of Teresa tampering with the survey stake. He also says I need to push for the financial records at the hearing and demand transparency. I ask him what happens if they vote to uphold the fines. He says I appeal to the management company, and if that fails, I take it to small claims court. He also says I have a trump card that I should save for the right moment. I ask him what it is. He says he found something in the HOA insurance documents. The carrier has been receiving harassment complaints about Teresa, and the policy has a clause that excludes coverage for intentional acts. If the board does not address the harassment, the insurance carrier can cancel the policy, and the entire neighborhood loses coverage. He says that is leverage. I ask him how we use it. He says we do not reveal it unless we have to. We let Teresa dig herself deeper, and then we show the board that her behavior is putting the whole association at risk. The hearing is on a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. I arrive at 6:45 with Marcus and Phil. The room is set up with a long table at the front for the board and folding chairs for residents. Teresa is sitting at the table with Brad and two other board members I do not recognize. There are about a dozen other residents in the audience. I sit in the front row. Marcus sits next to me. Phil sits behind us. Brad calls the meeting to order and says the first item is my fence violation. He reads the notice aloud, including the fines. He asks if I want to respond. I stand up and hand him the binder Marcus prepared. I say I have documented every step of the application process, every communication with Teresa and the management company, and every incident of harassment and obstruction. I also hand him a USB drive with the video of Teresa tampering with the survey stake. Brad looks at the binder and sets it aside. He says the board will review it and respond in writing. I say that is not acceptable. I want a decision tonight. Brad says the board does not make decisions under pressure. I say I am not applying pressure. I am asking for accountability. Teresa leans forward and says, "You started work without approval. That is a violation. The fine stands. I do not negotiate with violations." If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. I look at her and say, "You told me to go ahead and call whoever I want. You have a committee for that. Do you remember saying that?" She blinks. I pull out my phone and play a recording. It is from the day she tried to stop Ray's crew. Her voice is clear. "Go ahead and call whoever you want." I have a committee for that. The room goes quiet. I say, "You have obstructed my project at every step. You have invented fees, stalled my application, tampered with my property markers, and tried to tow my contractor's truck. I have police reports, video evidence, and witness testimony. I also have a demand for 3 years of financial records, which you have refused to provide in violation of Pennsylvania law. I want those records, and I want them tonight." Brad shifts in his seat. He says the board will discuss the records request in executive session. I say no. Pennsylvania law requires you to provide them within 5 business days. It has been 3 weeks. Marcus stands up and hands Brad a second letter. It is a formal complaint filed with the state, citing the records violation and requesting an investigation. Brad reads the letter and sets it down. He looks at Teresa. She looks away. One of the other board members, a woman in her 60s, says, "I think we need to table this and bring in the management company." Brad nods. He says the hearing is continued to next month. I say no. I have a family event in 2 weeks. I need a decision now. Brad says the board does not work on your schedule. I say the board works on the law, and the law says you cannot deny me access to records. You cannot impose fines without due process, and you cannot retaliate against me for filing complaints. Phil stands up and says, "Teresa did the same thing to me." She stalled my deck project, forced me to use her preferred contractor, and cost me thousands of dollars. I should have fought back. I did not. But I am willing to testify that this is a pattern. Another resident, a woman I have never met, stands up and says, Teresa blocked my shed permit for 6 months because I would not use her contractor. She said it was about aesthetics, but it was really about money. I have emails. 2 more residents stand up and say similar things. The room is buzzing. Brad bangs his hand on the table and says, "We are not litigating old complaints tonight. This hearing is about the fence violation." I say no. This hearing is about Teresa abusing her authority and the board enabling her. Marcus steps forward and says, "I have reviewed the HOA financial records that were provided to another client in a separate matter. Those records show that over the past 3 years, the association has paid one contractor, Summit Fencing, over $200,000 for work that should have cost half that. Summit Fencing is owned by Teresa Gray's brother-in-law. That is vendor favoritism, and it is fraud." The room erupts. Brad tries to restore order. Teresa stands up and says, "That is a lie. Summit Fencing is a licensed contractor. We hired them because they do good work." Marcus says, "Then why did you refuse to provide the invoices when this resident requested them? And why did you charge him $450 for digital records?" Teresa does not answer. Brad says, "We need to end this meeting now." I say no. We need to address this now. I have one more piece of evidence. I pull out a manila folder and hand it to Brad. Inside is a copy of the HOA insurance policy and a letter from the insurance carrier. The letter is dated 2 weeks ago. It says the carrier has received multiple harassment complaints related to Teresa Gray's conduct, and that the policy excludes coverage for intentional acts. It also says that if the board does not take corrective action, the carrier will not renew the policy when it expires in 60 days. Without insurance, the HOA cannot operate, and every homeowner in Fairview Estates will be personally liable for any claims. Brad reads the letter. His face goes pale. He looks at Teresa. She looks at the letter and then at me. I say, "This is your trump card moment, Teresa. You wanted to play enforcement games. You wanted to micromanage my fence like it is fine art. You wanted to tow trucks and pull survey stakes and invent fees. But you forgot that your behavior has consequences. The insurance carrier does not negotiate with violations either. They have a committee for that, and the committee just told the board that you are a liability." Teresa sits down. Brad looks at the other board members. The woman in her 60s says, "We need to vote." Brad says, "Vote on what?" She says, "A motion to remove Teresa Gray as records custodian and suspend her from board activities pending an investigation." The motion is seconded. The vote is 3-1. Teresa is the only no. Brad says, "The motion passes." Teresa, you are removed from your position effective immediately. You will surrender all association records and access credentials by end of business tomorrow. You are also barred from attending board meetings or interfering with homeowner projects. If you violate this order, the board will seek a restraining order. Teresa stands up, grabs her clipboard and her bundle of zip ties, and walks out. The room is silent for a few seconds. Then someone starts clapping. Within seconds, half the room is applauding. Brad bangs on the table again and says, "We are adjourned." I walk out with Marcus and Phil. Phil shakes my hand and says, "That was worth the wait." The next morning, I get an email from the management company. It is a correction email retracting the fines, approving my fence retroactively, and apologizing for the delays. The email also says the board is conducting a full audit of vendor payments, and that a report will be provided to all homeowners within 30 days. I forward the email to Marcus. He replies, "You won." I reply, "No, the neighborhood won." Teresa was just the symptom. The favoritism was the disease. 2 days later, I get a knock on my door. It is Brad. He is holding a box. He says, "These are the financial records you requested. All 3 years. Digital and printed. No charge." He also hands me a check for $575. He says this is a refund of the fines and fees you paid. The board voted unanimously to reimburse you. I thank him. He says, "I owe you an apology. I should have seen what Teresa was doing a long time ago. I ignored it because it was easier than dealing with it. That was wrong." I say, "Just make sure it does not happen again." He nods and leaves. The next week, the insurance carrier sends a follow-up letter to the board. It says the carrier has reviewed the corrective actions taken by the board and has decided to renew the policy, subject to the completion of the vendor audit and the implementation of new oversight procedures. The letter also says that the harassment complaints have been closed and that no further action is required at this time. The board distributes the letter to all homeowners, along with a summary of the vendor audit findings. The audit confirms that Summit Fencing was overpaid by approximately $90,000 over 3 years, and that Teresa Gray received undisclosed payments from her brother-in-law. The board refers the matter to the Erie County District Attorney for investigation. Teresa resigns from the board entirely and moves out of Fairview Estates 2 months later. My fence stands. My family event happens on schedule. My sister and her kids love the new yard. My mom brings potato salad and tells me I did the right thing. Phil brings his wife and they stay for hours. Ray stops by with a 6-pack and says he is glad he stuck with the job. Marcus shows up and we sit on the back deck and watch the sunset. He says, "You walked away on purpose, because you wanted her to follow and say more. That is what you told me." I say, "Yeah. I knew she could not help herself. She had to have the last word, and I let her." He laughs. He says, "That is the oldest trick in the book." I say, "It worked." 3 months later, the board holds a special election to fill Teresa's seat. Phil runs and wins. He tells me he is going to push for transparency reforms and a new contractor bidding process. I tell him I will support him. The neighborhood feels different now. People talk to each other more. There is less fear of the board. The covenants are still the covenants, but they are applied fairly, and there is accountability. I run into Brad at the grocery store a few months after that. He says the vendor audit is complete, and the board has recovered about $60,000 in overpayments from Summit Fencing through a settlement. The money is being used to repave the walking trails and upgrade the clubhouse. He also says the district attorney is still investigating Teresa, and that there may be criminal charges. I tell him I hope justice is done. He says, "Me too." He also tells me that the board has adopted new rules requiring competitive bids for all contracts over $10,000, and that all board members have to sign a conflict of interest policy. I tell him that is a good start. He says, "It is because of you." I say, "It is because people finally had enough." I finish my night classes in the spring and get my associate degree. I use the GI Bill to enroll in a bachelor's program online. The fence needs a fresh coat of stain after the first winter, so I spend a Saturday afternoon doing that. Phil comes over and helps. We talk about the neighborhood, the board, and how things have changed. He says he wishes he had fought back when Teresa went after him. I tell him it is never too late to do the right thing. He says, "You proved that." A year later, I get a letter from the insurance carrier. It is addressed to all homeowners in Fairview Estates. The letter thanks the board for implementing reforms and says the association's policy has been renewed at a reduced premium because of improved risk management. The savings are being passed on to homeowners in the form of lower dues. The letter also says that the carrier has not received any harassment complaints in over a year, and that the association is now considered a model community. I frame the letter and hang it in my garage next to the gate latch I held up like proof that day when Teresa screamed at me over wet concrete. The fence is still standing. The HOA is still the HOA. But the rules are applied fairly now, and the people who abused their power are gone. That is all I ever wanted. I did not set out to take down Teresa Gray or reform the Fairview Estates Association. I just wanted to put up a fence so my dog could run around and my family could have a nice barbecue. But when Teresa decided to turn it into a war, I decided to fight back. I documented everything. I built a paper trail, I found allies, and I used the system against itself. I showed the insurance carrier the paperwork. The tow yard refused to keep cooperating, and the whole house of cards fell. That is how you win against an HOA. Not with vandalism or threats or breaking the law. You win by being smarter, more patient, and more prepared than they are. You win by making them prove their case, and then showing everyone that they do not have one. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.